You know her face. Everybody did. In the early 90s, it was everywhere. On magazine covers, on billboards, in music videos, and in every fashion campaign that mattered. Helena Christensen was one of the defining supermodels of her generation. But while the world was obsessed with the image, very few people knew the person behind it.
I mean, of course, it changes you, but, I feel like it changed me in an okay, decent way. I think you just gotta be open. You gotta be open for whatever is out there and, try not to be too cynical. Let it all in and experience life as it happens.
She wasn't chasing the spotlight. She didn't have to. But somehow, she still became one of the most memorable names in fashion, and stayed that way. But this isn't just a story about beauty. It's about the cost and everything that came with it. The pressure, the silence, the relationships that unraveled under the spotlight, the grueling schedules, and the quiet decision to step behind the camera just when she could have stayed in front of it forever. Helena wasn't trying to be seen, but she saw it all and lived through more than most people will ever know. This is the real story of one of fashion's most recognizable faces. Not the photos, not the headlines, the actual life. Before the runways, the music videos, or the magazine covers, Helena Christensen was just a quiet kid growing up in Copenhagen. Born on Christmas Day, 1968, she was raised by a Danish father and a Peruvian mother. It was an unusual mix in Denmark at the time, and one that would quietly shape her long before fashion did. Helena once described her mother as passionate, artistic, and intense, and her father as calm, organized, and deeply grounded. Somewhere in between those two energies is where she seemed to land. She grew up speaking multiple languages: Danish, Spanish, English, Swedish, a bit of French. Not because she was chasing sophistication, but because she had to. "Nobody speaks Danish," she once said dryly, "so you just adapt." Helena's early life wasn't glamorous. She's talked about how normal it all felt. A modest home, quiet routines, days spent between school and long walks with her mom. But even back then, something about her stood out. Her eyes were striking, her expression always a little unreadable. She didn't dress for attention. She didn't speak to impress. And maybe that's what made people stop and look. She's since shared that growing up tall and skinny made her an easy target. The teasing stuck with her. "It doesn't go away," she once said. "You just learn how to carry it differently." By her teens, she was already being scouted. At 17, she entered, and won, the Miss Universe Denmark pageant. She represented her country at the international competition that year, but she didn't love the experience. It felt too staged, too rehearsed. What came next suited her more. The Ford Models Look of the Year contest in 1987. She didn't win, but she didn't need to. The fashion world had already started paying attention. Soon after, she left Denmark for Paris. It sounds like a fairy tale. A teenager boards a plane, lands in one of the world's fashion capitals, and starts working with the biggest names in the business. But the truth is, it was unfamiliar, fast, and overwhelming at first. She was barely out of high school, not yet fluent in the business, and suddenly navigating a world of castings, new expectations, and a culture that treated fashion very differently than back home.
I've been modeling in Paris for about 2 years, and then I did some back in Denmark, but it's completely different, It's doing it here and doing it there. Here, it's people's life, It's the way they, the designers and the photographers, there's so much into it, It's the whole life. In Denmark, nobody really, they don't really care about it. They just do it and it comes out in the magazine and that's it. Here, it's like the whole hysteria about this business.
That contrast stuck with her. But she adapted. She always did. What helped was that Helena didn't seem to need to perform. She wasn't the loudest in the room. She wasn't trying to sell a persona. She just had a presence, a kind of quiet confidence that translated, even when she said very little. Photographers noticed. Designers noticed. And the girl who had grown up between two cultures was now making a name for herself on a third. When Helena Christensen arrived in Paris, she wasn't a star yet, just a young woman with a portfolio and a one-way ticket. But it didn't take long for people to notice something different. She didn't walk into rooms with a performance. She didn't chase attention. But the camera noticed her anyway. That presence, like she was seeing more than she was saying, became her signature. Paris in the late 80s was fast, intense, and not always forgiving. Models were expected to glide through castings with polish and confidence. Helena showed up in secondhand clothes, barely speaking French, and still stood out. Photographers weren't looking for perfect. They were looking for real, and Helena gave them that, without trying.
No one ever told me to change anything about my looks or my personality, for that sake. And maybe that's what gave us, the longevity in a business where everything is, very fickle and where you have no guarantee of, how long anyone's going to be interested in working with you.
One of her first big moments came with photographer Fabrizio Ferri. His moody black and white editorials brought out Helena's quiet intensity. Then came Peter Lindbergh, who never wanted perfection, just emotion. With him, Helena didn't look like a model. She looked like someone with a story. Then came Herb Ritts. In 1991, Helena starred in the now iconic music video for Chris Isaak's Wicked Game. Ritts directed it. No script, no dialogue. Just a beach in Hawaii, 2 bodies, wind, water, and a feeling.
She was very nice. She was a real good sport.
Chris and I, we had a good time.
People say, oh yeah, what a great job. You got to go out and lay around on the beach, but they kept throwing buckets of water on her to make her look wet. She was like shivering. And then I was looking at her feet. There was blood all over her feet because rocks, this coral rocks are like glass, kept coming up and hitting her. And she never complained.
The shoot wasn't glamorous. The wind was cold, the volcanic rock left cuts on their feet, and they spent hours barefoot in the surf. Helena pushed through it all without complaint, but you wouldn't know it from watching. Her stillness in that video, the way she looked just past the camera, burned into people's memory. It turned a moody love song into an instant classic, and it made her unforgettable. From there, Helena was everywhere. Vogue, Elle, Harper's Bazaar. She walked for Chanel, Versace, Valentino, YSL. She became the face of Revlon. Her Guess campaigns, drenched in sun and attitude, were pasted on billboards across continents. And still, she stayed out of the circus. She rarely gave interviews. She avoided overexposure. While the industry chased celebrity, Helena stayed slightly out of frame, close enough to feel present, distant enough to stay interesting. She could be romantic one moment, androgynous the next, soft, sharp, mysterious, simple. Whatever the shoot called for, Helena could meet it without overselling it. She didn't project something onto the camera. She just let it find what was already there. But behind it all was still that quiet girl from Copenhagen. She once said she never had a plan. She just listened to what felt right, and that trust in her own instinct became the through line of everything she did. By the early 1990s, fashion was at its loudest, and Helena Christensen was right in the middle of it. The supermodel era was in full swing. Faces weren't just on magazine covers, they were part of the culture. They opened shows, closed deals, and moved through the world like rock stars. Helena had become one of them, instantly recognizable, constantly in demand. But she didn't move like the others. While the industry chased spectacle, she stayed still. While others leaned into persona, she kept hers close. There's something that happens when a model reaches that level. The job becomes more than just the work. It's branding, interviews, public appearances, personality. She didn't seem interested in any of that. "I've never had a strategy," she once said. "I've just always followed my instinct. If I don't like something, I walk away from it." It wasn't a philosophy, it was how she lived. She gave what she had to on set. Then she left. No entourage, no public persona. If anything, she treated fame like a side effect, not the point. That approach stood out, especially in the early 90s when the fashion industry was booming into full-on spectacle. Models were becoming tabloid names. The drama wasn't just on the catwalk. It was spilling into headlines. But Helena kept a kind of distance from it. Not aloof, just aware of how quickly it could all start owning you. She worked constantly, but she didn't chase coverage. She didn't talk about her private life, and when magazines tried to pin her down, define her look, her appeal, there was never one clear answer. But fame comes with pressure, even if you don't feed it. The schedules got tougher. Flights, fittings, shows, shoots, sometimes all in the same week. Models were expected to be icons on demand, and at that level, there wasn't room to slow down. It took stamina, and it wore people down. Sometimes fast. Behind the scenes, plenty of them broke under it. Helena never spoke much about it at the time. Hardly anyone did. But the toll on mental health was real. She later reflected on how relentless the pace could be and how easily people burned out under the pressure to stay thin, stay perfect, stay relevant. She's been open in more recent years about how important it is for models to protect their well-being, to speak up, ask for help, and know when to walk away. Nobody talked about mental health back then, she said in an interview. Now I make sure they know it's okay to. She never made herself the center of the conversation, but later said she wished more people had been encouraged to talk about what they were going through. At the time, she said, "You're in a different city every day. There's pressure to be on all the time. But I never wanted to pretend. I just needed to find quiet when I could." And still, the industry couldn't get enough of her. She was one of the original Victoria's Secret faces before the Angel Wings took over the brand. She worked with the best, and they kept calling her back. What made her different is that she never let the exposure shape her identity. Other models embraced the fame, the visibility. Helena stayed just far enough outside it that her mystery stayed intact. Even now, it's hard to define exactly why she was so captivating. Maybe that's the reason. There's no question she belonged to that era. But she didn't belong to it in the way most people did. For someone so visible, Helena Christensen kept an extraordinary amount to herself. Even at the height of her fame, flying between shoots, walking runways, fronting campaigns, there were entire parts of her life that never made it into the press. No interviews, just absence. It wasn't an image, it was just how she lived. One of the most private chapters was her relationship with Michael Hutchence. They were together for 4 years, from the early to mid-1990s. At the time, both were international stars. She was one of the world's most in-demand models, and he was the frontman of INXS, still riding the global success of Kick. From the outside, they looked like a perfect pairing, beautiful, famous, and composed. But behind the scenes, their connection was deeper than most people knew. Helena has described that time as intensely emotional and real. They lived together in Paris and Copenhagen. They traveled constantly but rarely gave interviews or appeared together at events. "We loved each other deeply," she said in the BBC documentary Mystify. "He trusted me. We had something very special." Then, in 1992, everything shifted. Michael had flown to Copenhagen to see Helena. One night, during a night out, he got into a confrontation with a taxi driver. He was punched, fell backward, and hit his head on the pavement. The injury left him with permanent damage to his sense of smell and taste. But it wasn't just physical. Helena said later, "It changed him." And it did. Slowly, she watched someone she loved become someone she didn't always recognize. He was still Michael. Funny, sensitive, wild. But the spark had dulled. His moods became unpredictable. His confidence wavered. She's spoken about how heartbreaking it was to witness that shift, and how helpless she felt. He once told her, "If I have children, I'll never be able to smell my baby." Those words stayed with her. Helena stayed. Through the confusion, the doctors, the unraveling, there were all these people feeding him drugs, she said. But no one helping him. It wasn't glamorous. It was quiet, messy, and full of a kind of grief that doesn't get named while you're still in it. Years later, she said she wished she had known how to help him more. But at the time, she was just trying to hold things together. And that experience left its mark, not loudly. But it lingered. They drifted apart. And by 1995, their relationship ended. What followed was tabloid chaos, but none of it came from her. Shortly after their split, Hutchence began a highly publicized relationship with British TV host Paula Yates. The press latched on quickly, not just because of the scandal. Yates was still married to Bob Geldof, but because of the contrast. Yates gave interviews, fed headlines. Helena said nothing. Then in November 1997, 2 years after she and Hutchence had separated, he was found dead in a hotel room in Sydney. Helena didn't release a statement. Some members of Hutchence's family and the media questioned her silence. Why hadn't she spoken? In Mystify, she said it was simply too painful. Years passed before she spoke publicly. When she finally did, she didn't dramatize anything. She didn't reshape the story to make herself look better. She just told the truth, that he had changed, that she saw it happening, that it was painful, and that it wasn't something to be shared with strangers. There's strength in that. Not the loud kind, the kind that comes from protecting someone you loved, even long after they're gone. Helena Christensen didn't owe the world an explanation, and she never tried to give one. After reaching the peak of modeling, covering magazines, walking for the biggest designers, starring in one of the most iconic music videos of the decade, Helena Christensen didn't just slow down. She expanded. She picked up a camera and, over time, became what some in the industry have called one of the most compelling photographic voices to come out of the modeling world. This wasn't a pivot made for headlines or reinvention. It was natural. She'd been photographing long before her modeling career took off, often carrying her camera while traveling, capturing real life as it unfolded around her. "I was just really tall and skinny from a very young age," she once said. "But I always had a camera in my hand even before I started modeling." During her years on set, Helena paid close attention. "Many of the photographers I looked up to were photographing me and teaching me," she said. "I was always asking questions, watching, learning." Her work began showing up in Nylon, Elle, Marie Claire, and was featured in exhibitions in Berlin, Copenhagen, New York. What stood out wasn't the technical precision, but the emotion. Soft motion, natural light, fleeting expressions, and the quiet in-between moments that most people miss. She didn't style things to perfection. She let them be. Raw, lived in, real. She later said it was never about the perfect picture. It was about capturing the emotion of that moment. Modeling didn't stop. She still took on projects when they felt right, with people she trusted, or for causes she believed in. But she no longer moved with urgency. She didn't need to be in every campaign to feel relevant. She enjoyed the modeling and she enjoyed the photography. There was room for both. That balance came with time, and with experiences that tested her. One of them happened during a Vogue shoot in the Indian Ocean. The boat carrying the crew broke down miles from shore. There was no radio, no food, and no way to call for help. The waves were rough. The volcanic rocks beneath their feet were sharp enough to draw blood. But Helena stayed calm. She finished the shoot like she always did, focused, composed. She never mentioned it publicly until much later. Not to dramatize it, just to explain what people never saw, and maybe that's what helped shape her approach in the years that followed. As she entered her 40s, she refused to disappear like the industry so often expects. She posted photos, in lingerie, swimwear, barefaced, not as a statement, but as herself. The internet, of course, had opinions. Some praised her confidence. Others questioned it. There were comments about age, about bodies, about what women should do past a certain point. Helena didn't argue. She just kept sharing the work she believed in, with the same calm certainty that had carried her all along.
The key to self-confidence, I think, is mostly about not caring too much about what anyone else thinks of you and try to be in the moment no matter what.
What's less talked about is how she reshaped the idea of longevity in fashion. Not by reinventing herself, but by staying grounded in who she was. Always. She didn't chase youth or relevance. She just stayed true to her instincts, wore what felt right, worked with people she respected, chose meaning over spectacle. And she gave back, not publicly, not performatively. But when younger models came to her for advice, she gave it, encouraging them to slow down, to speak up, to ask for more, never for attention, just because it mattered. Her approach to fame offers a fresh perspective in an era obsessed with visibility. She's never chased likes or followers, rarely courts the spotlight outside of her work, and values privacy as a form of self-respect. In a world screaming for attention, she chooses calm. Her creative life kept expanding. Photography, yes, but also design, curation, even food. She wasn't trying to build an empire. She was just following her curiosity wherever it led. She once said she doesn't care how people define her, as long as she's still learning, still creating, still doing work that means something to her. Alongside her work, Helena's connection to Peru, her mother's homeland, grew deeper. She didn't talk much about it, but she acted. Through Oxfam, she visited rural communities, met farmers, and heard stories most will never know. This wasn't about cameras or campaigns. It was about real understanding. Climate change, water access, sustainable farming, and their impact far from fashion's spotlight. Amid all this, creativity, activism, work, came motherhood. Helena had her son, Mingus, in 1999. It didn't stop her career, but shifted her focus. No magazine covers or lifestyle interviews framed this change. Motherhood added a new layer to how she navigated life, deciding what to share, what to keep private, and when to say yes or no. She once said, motherhood taught her to slow down, to stop racing and be present. This wasn't fear, but clarity. If a job felt off or the energy wasn't right, she simply didn't take it. There was always something more important at home. She later reflected in an interview, "It changed how I moved through the world. I still loved what I did, but I thought more about what mattered beyond it." What stands out isn't that she did less, but that everything carried more intention. In a world obsessed with reinvention, Helena never reinvented herself. She just evolved, without explanation or apology. She's still here, behind the camera, choosing what the world sees and what stays hers. And honestly, that might be the strongest part of her story. You may know her face, but now maybe you know a little more of the life behind it.